Perfect.
All right. Well, welcome back to All Things Acura. This is Matt.
And I'm Justin. And is this really the normal All Things Acura?
I don't know.
I think we set out just to answer a question. And we're going to try to do that today.
Yeah, that's right.
I really just posed a question, and well, as you do that sometimes, it sends you down a rabbit hole, and you probably know by the title of this show that the question.
That's the secret subtitle is that this is the rabbit hole. But yeah, so anyway, so we're back here. This is after our discussion about the Integra. We do want to come back at some point. I don't know when you're planning on.
Yeah, we'll catch everybody up on production and Integra. That will be coming very soon, actually right behind this. But we posed this question. We really wanted to try to do this before, but as we go farther down the rabbit hole of the chips, and Matt said he was going to bring some chips in today, and I said, well, that'll help us sell more cars and
bring the chips. Yeah,
he said not those chips.
Oh, well, I did open up a key. So, the whole question with what, it's funny because we talked a little bit about this in an earlier podcast because we felt like it was important, but we didn't really go down the rabbit hole of what the chip shortage really means still. I think, that we knew about it at the end of last year, but we didn't really we didn't know how that was going to look as this year went on. And I think we kind of just kept thinking things were going to get better. And here we are still answering a lot of those questions.
Yeah, and I think the one question that we really posed was, and unfortunately the overall media, and I know maybe that could be us right now, so I don't want to combine everybody in one group, but is that there's these cars that are built and they're waiting for us to plug in this one chip and it's going to get rolling and you'll get your car delivered, anytime now.
Right.
And so we said, that's interesting because as we started to ask around, well, how many chips are in a car? How many chips does it take? What are we missing that we need to get these cars built and get things rolling? And because that seems to be obviously the clog in the industry, I guess, per se, right? If there's one problem, now there's multiple. As we go down the rabbit hole, there's multiple problems with supply chains and events around the world and things going on. But it seemed to be that's the focus of what started all this, right? And so we said, okay, well, what's that mean? How is that? What's that problem look like, right? How many chips are in a car? We said, and as you start going down that and finding out the information, it's all over the place.
Yeah, and I think there's that generic term of chips, and as a salesperson talking to a consumer, they ask questions to you, they expect a little bit of an answer, and I'm mildly educated on the subject, but as we kept researching, we're like, well, what the heck is a chip? And we started to delve into, why is this a problem? What chips are we talking about? Are we talking about as if you're someone in the, computer industry or some of the tech stuff, terms like motherboard, transistors, things like that. But what part are we missing? And how many are, and then we started posing the question, well, are we missing a bunch, a couple? Is it one? How many are in a car? And that's what ended up happening.
Right. And as I researched that, I found a great article that said, well, how many semiconductors are in a car? And I got to read. Scott wrote this article. Scott Buchman. Sorry, Scott, if I butchered that. And he said I recently read a statement that said there's something like 1,400 individual semiconductor chips in a typical modern car. I wondered, can that be correct?
Yeah,
same thing we did, right?
Yeah. At first we were, I think. I never really gave that thought. And so as soon as we kind of read that, we were like, oh man, that seems like a lot. I don't know what that means. And again, that goes back to what that chip actually is. Are we talking little pieces? How could there be that many, right?
Right. And as you go down the rabbit hole of how many chips are in a car, there's, as the experts in the industry might claim, boy, I've seen it as low as 25 to 50, and I've seen it as high as 3,000 plus. And so we really scratched our head and said, wow, we do this every day, and we don't know the answer, and we don't know what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, and so there's been just a lot of gray area with that, and I think it's not fair to consumers, and it's in some ways not even fair to us as a dealership because people like I said, they come and ask those questions to us, and it's well, we don't necessarily, we should maybe know, and what's funny is we know people very close to Acura who don't apparently know as much.
Yeah, either, so we did. I actually just posed the question the other day to some of our connections at Acura, and
That's right.
we got some crazy answers. And I wouldn't say crazy. It goes back to, there isn't probably one right answer because, to be fair, all cars are different in the amount of chips or processing power they have as far as equipment. And so that number can vary. But there are people that are standing real tall saying one or the other.
Yeah.
And so we're going to break it down a little bit because I guess what we did learn is it's a much more complicated, not only answer, but problem that the industry has than we thought.
Right, exactly. And so what we did was we did ask random people. I know we didn't make like a huge thing of it, but we started asking different people around our showroom, different customers, how many chips do you guys think are in a car? And that lent itself to, we don't really know. And like you said, as soon as we started doing that research, we're like, well, holy cow, this is a much more compounded problem than we really, I think, originally have felt. And there's so many other layers to this, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but some of the stuff that we heard from some people, again, it ranged from in the 20s, 30s, all the way up to, I think some people did say a couple thousand.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what we found through everyone,
Yeah, so the breakdown is when you really dive in, and again, the problem is we still, and I even said this to Matt earlier, we can't answer the question exactly, but we can give you a better understanding of what the issues look like, and then maybe we can forecast out a little bit farther based on what we do know. Well, when are we going to see this ease up a little bit? One thing, obviously, to be clear, that the auto manufacturers use a lot of older chip technology. So it's not always a fair statement when you say that, well, your cell phone or the provider that makes your cell phone, whether it be an Apple phone or an Android phone, or your gaming station is taking all those chips from the industry, because those aren't necessarily all the chips.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and in the article that I literally just read, like, we're still kind of trying to keep up with this stuff because a simple Google takes you down, again, a bunch of rabbit holes and different articles out there. And so you realize that, how does the auto industry chip, relate to what is developed in a phone or any technology for that matter. And like Justin said, there are very different chips in both of those items. So, when it comes to, kind of what happened was a lot of these manufacturers of chips put a lot of their resources toward developing, computers, small personal device technologies, things like that.
Yeah, so those chips, the newer style chips that go into your cell phone and computers and those devices are much, not only they're a better, faster chip, but they can manufacture those much faster, and they're much more profitable for the chip companies.
That's true too. Yeah.
Whereas the auto industry is really asking them to go back and make old chips, old designs. And now, to be fair to the auto industry, there's a lot of reasons why they do that, but there's a lot of older chip technology that they're going back and asking them to make that. And a lot of these chip companies, to be frank, just aren't going to go back and build a new facility to make old chips. It just doesn't make sense. So it's then you talk about, well, then the auto manufacturers have to shift. Well, it's a bigger shift than you think when you decide, well, okay, now we know that the car definitely has probably more than 100 or 200 chips. Yeah. When you start really dissecting it, the right number probably is in the thousands.
Yeah, which I guess is the first time we're answering that question.
Right. Yeah. The right number probably is in the thousands. Yeah. And then for them to go back and decide, well, we're going to make thousands of old chips or change those chips to newer style chips, it becomes a monumental issue.
And it's kind of, to Justin's point, and to be fair to the auto manufacturers, a phone is very, we go through phones every couple of years, right? Where when an auto manufacturer makes a car, not only did they have to take 4 to 6 years to develop that car, 4 to 6 years ago, right? They also have to say, and we've talked about this before, anything that is really made on a car has to basically be, 10 years?
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces that they have to look at that the rest of that industry doesn't. One is just how robust that chip is. It has to withstand, elements that your phone doesn't have to. You're not leaving it outside every day, parked in the rain and the snow and in the sunshine, right? Yep. And it has to, be more reliable for that long term. And then it has to have a long shelf life, because even after they're done with the 5 years of production of designing that car, R&D, 5 years of that car being on the market, Well, even if they eliminate that model and never use it again, then that manufacturer is required to keep parts on the shelf for a minimum, I think, of 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's a 20-year
Right.
life cycle from the day they say, we're going to put this chip in this car, right?
It's amazing. I remember, like, early on in my career doing this, we talked about that because I'm like, well, man, like, a lot of people, I think on average, they keep almost 5 years. It's like 4.5 years, something like that. People keep their cars, but there's still a lot of people that will drive their car longer than that. And if you're someone who has, I don't know, an 8 to 10-year-old, any car, Acura for that matter, and something breaks down in that car, you want to be able to get that fixed.
Sure. Yeah. So and somebody's got to produce those chips that go into those components, and we'll dive into what that looks like because that's where the rabbit hole just keeps going.
Yeah, it explodes.
But it's not that newer style chip that they just need to take from that cell phone provider and say, look, we need that chip to plug into this over here. It's a completely different animal.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, and so that's what happened as we went down this rabbit hole of figuring out, okay, how do we educate ourselves better about this topic is, you had to have a better understanding of like, okay, why is that happening, right? What's the hold up there? And that's essentially what's happening is that they're dinosaur chips essentially. And like you said, those manufacturers of those chips, they're trying to produce the stuff for the cell phones, the newer technology, stuff like that.
Yeah, like Matt mentioned earlier, they put those resources when COVID hit and the auto manufacturers, and this is kind of what's been all over the news. They said, okay, we're going to cut our production. We don't want it. I don't know if that's necessarily exactly what you're saying. That's probably not how it went down exactly, but they cut back on what they said they were going to need, and they put priority on home electronics, other devices, and auto manufacturers kind of went to the back of the line, and so now they're trying to get some of that priority back. Yeah. But it's not as simple as them just looking and taking those chips and moving over. It's such a more complicated issue.
Yeah.
So then it begs the question of, okay, so well, how many are in the car, right? How many are there really in the car, and what are we waiting on?
Yep.
Well, like we said, I think we think based on everything we've seen and all the articles and all the people we've listened to and our conversations we've heard is it's somewhere in the thousands.
Yeah,
I mean,
in the low thousands for sure.
You're definitely in that 1,200 to 2,000, depending on the vehicle, depending on the options and equipment that go into it.
Yeah, and I didn't want to really believe that because it just felt like such a huge number, and that's what's so interesting about this. And I know, we kind of talked about, okay, well, how does one manufacturer not really know how many chips they need? And it goes back to the fact that they obviously all these different providers of different products inside the car, whether it's like you said, a power seat, all those little things come from different places. So not one person's going to necessarily know how many chips that specific component has.
Sure, and that goes back to if you ask the manufacturer how many chips they need to produce that car, for them, that car might take 77 chips to produce. But that doesn't mean that's how many chips are in that automobile.
Correct.
And so as you start to dive down into each one of those components, whether it be an infotainment system, seats, headlights, they all come from a supplier that also is getting chips to supply what they need for those components. And that's where the number just balloons astronomical.
Absolutely. And that's it's obviously, as you research that yourself, if you're listening to this, you say, oh, I want to know more about that. You'll see what we're talking about. It's not as clear of an answer. So I guess that kind of goes back to, it's funny as we read some of these articles from back then, there was some expectation of like, well, hopefully things are going to get better, in 2022. And I don't know if we've seen that quite yet, but
yeah, I think really to start the year off, we were very optimistic, and I think the industry was very optimistic on that things would start opening up. Well, now we've seen some other events go on in the world, which I'm sure you're aware of. What's happening out there.
Right. Yeah, we don't
want to get political because that's not part of our thing, and maybe it's not political, but
it's just it's part of.
What that's done is now put constraints on the supplies that go to make those chips, and we're starting to wonder if we're going to feel another crunch on that whole. Not to mention the whole infrastructure of the suppliers in general, not just chips.
Absolutely, and neon is that's one of those things.
Yeah, so neon you Crane was the
you could, I think
number one supplier of neon. I think they supplied 98%, some crazy number of the world's neon. I mean, whew.
Yeah.
And we're talking about, like, it's just like the industry relying on these handful, and I think it's a handful. I think it was 3 chip manufacturers, the entire automotive industry, which it seems crazy. And I guess from years ago, not to derail that, but I guess years ago there were all kinds of chip manufacturers, and over time, you know, we've ended up with just these handful.
Right.
Shame on us as an industry that happened, and maybe they wanted to produce other components that made sense. And so when you rely on just those 3 and something breaks, right now you have big holes. And so again, we're relying on one source for neon that makes that they need to produce these chips, and now there's problems.
It was really similar to the Takata airbag situation where there was only like a handful of suppliers based. I think same kind of thing. And Takata airbag supplied some it was like 80% or something of cars
80%
built between
of the industry.
Whatever years it was. I can't remember what the years were. But that's, you know, obviously who knows what's going to happen in the future from now on. Like if they're going to look at that differently and say, well, we can't, because if obviously one thing did happen with the pandemic and COVID and everything, but then obviously more things happen, whether it be natural disasters, things like that. And so it makes you realize, like, should they really be relying on that? I realize that you take those risks and things like that, but you know.
Yeah, I think so. The industry's taking a hard look at that. They learned a lot of those lessons way back, if people remember the tsunami in 2010, and that really affected a lot of the import brands' infrastructure as far as supplies and chips and automobiles. And so they looked at bringing those here in the United States. The challenge with a lot of that is now they have, and they're still relying on these other places for some of these components. I think obviously the ideal situation is to have multiple of these suppliers available in different areas that can really, you know, even the blow if something happens, whether it be a natural disaster or, you know, this chip plant currently that's just got back up and running in Japan was the one they had to fire also, right? So, you know, fire, then they have an earthquake, and now they're trying to get that one up and running. And
and speaking of up and running, you know, that was another talk. You know, I know in Ohio here they're going to be building a chip plant.
Yeah, massive.
But, and it takes a lot of time to get those plants online. And I know the one gentleman we were listening to talked about like, you know,
so it's an incredible amount of time that it takes to make one of these chip facilities. And I said at the beginning of this, I said, it just doesn't make sense to me. You know, this industry, and you might say I'm not in the automotive industry, but there's a whole lot of things that touch the automotive industry. A whole lot. It's such a big percentage of the, you know, our economy, the world economy. Even if you're not directly here, you know, selling cars or producing the cars, there's so many things that touch it, right? And I said at the beginning, when we saw this coming and this was going to be a problem, I said, if you throw that much money at it, surely they got to be able to make one of these things pretty quick.
Right.
But it's not that simple, right? That to make a new chip factory, which are incredible, the automations through the roof, right? They, you know, everything's automated because it has to be to make these, you know, super intricate, you know, chips and super processors and such. And so it not only is it incredibly long time scale to make one of those, but it takes more chips, right? So it compounds the problem.
Right, exactly. And then those factories, what the one gentleman said, they have to be, and I don't remember the scale you used. You said it has to be basically 50 times cleaner than like a hospital
operating room. So they say you take your cleanest room that you can ever find, which example he used was a hospital operating room, and it has to be 50 times cleaner than that to create that environment. Well, that's just not one room. They got to create a whole factory that way, which is unbelievable.
And he says it takes time to do, which I don't know what that looks like. Does it mean just like cleaning every day? I mean, who knows? I've never been to one of those facilities. And so that's where, you know, I think, here we are. I'm like just pounding my head against the wall because I'm like, I can't believe, you know, we don't know when this is going to end, right? And this is all kind of lending itself to why we've been in the situation we've been in. And, you know, I don't know if there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and who knows what that looks like. But, you know, hopefully that happened. You know, we get those things online and get things moving quickly with that. And every brand's been affected differently. You know, I know we just looked at an article with Ford, you know, and I think we tried to make sure that this was kind of a real thing. And we kind of already knew this a little bit, but they're going to start shipping cars without some of those components.
Yeah, I think we talked just a little bit of that, of General Motors doing that and already doing that. But we just saw the article, and I think this was just the other day, a week ago. Yeah, 315. Kelly Blue Book had the article, the chip shortage. Ford will ship Explorers with missing features and then add them later. And when General Motors had already talked about that, I know with our Chevy store, either eliminating those features or offering them to the customer down the road. And we see now Ford doing that to try to get vehicles on the road because they're missing those things.
And this being an Acura show, we wanted to make sure, is Acura thinking about doing anything like that? So, if you're someone who's like an Acura either customer or like a future customer, whatever it might be, we wanted to make sure we kind of answer that for what we know with Acura, and to our knowledge, we don't believe they're going to do anything along those lines.
Yeah, so I asked that question, I think last year, actually when I heard that General Motors would ship vehicles without heated seats, I kind of went in sweat. I was like, are you kidding me? We're gonna sell. I mean, if there's a handful of features that come on every Acura, and that's one of them, and you start removing that stuff, it really changes what that looks like.
Yeah.
But I had asked them, and they said no, they're not. There's no plans of that. They had no intention of that, and nor do they today. Right? Yeah. If they can't build the car as it's supposed to be built, they're just not going to do it. Which you could argue in some cases might be a detriment to some people, because some people might say, well, fine. Don't give me my heated seats because we live here in Florida and we don't need them.
Yep.
I don't know if you do or not. Sorry.
Right.
But,
That's right. Yeah.
But in Ohio, we do.
Yep.
But I don't need them right now, and you can put those in later. I don't know if people look at that and say, I'd rather have my car and not have some of those features.
Yeah, and the other thing too is like, as I read that article back in December, like, things should start to ease up in 2022. I mean, who knows with everything happening right now if we're going to see, that to the end of 2022. So someone who gets one of these cars, who knows when that might be rectified. You might be months.
Yeah, and I think they say
longer.
They said in the article that it could be up to a year. I think they had to provide, they get that. And they also talked about in that they would be removing the start-stop device, which I knew General Motors and I think Ford had done prior. They talked about that on trucks, which interesting now that I think about that. Mm-hmm. Wow. Out of all the features to pick, as much as people don't like that feature, it might not be a feature you want to give up right now.
Yeah, almost like maybe what they should do, and I didn't think about this till just now, is that maybe they should I don't know, poll people and say, okay, what features can you live without, right? And I don't know if heated seats is one of those, but I mean, I'm sure there's features like the idle stop feature that people would definitely say, yeah, I don't need that.
Well, I think a lot of people dislike the idle stop feature, so they felt that would be an easy one to pull off the shelf for right now and say, okay, we won't put it on. Unfortunately, the gas prices have probably made that feature pretty desirable.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe people just still don't like that feature.
Right.
And they hit the button, they turn it off. They hate it enough. Yeah. I'll pay for the gas. Right.
Exactly. That's kind of where obviously we're at.
So the outlook, it's going to really depend a lot on what happens as far as things over in Europe, and I think we got to keep a close eye on what's going on over there. I did see a positive article coming from another manufacturer that has. They make wiring harnesses in Ukraine, and they said they were still up and running. Shocking. How they are, I don't know.
Right.
But so maybe what we're seeing is just a piece of it. I picture. I know when you talk about those events, I picture the whole place shut down. Nobody's doing anything. Nothing's happening.
Right.
I don't know that maybe that's a bad. That's a too general of a statement. So I don't know. Maybe there are things still happening, and it might not be as
and Ukraine's a big country, but they're I don't know though. I'm not there, and so and I meant to bring up that key earlier. Gosh darn it, I had that key.
So Matt, we were talking about components, and one of the interesting things that happened that Honda and Acura actually did do was when the 22 Honda Civic came out, they were trying to get that out on the market, and they said, okay, chips are obviously a problem. Mm-hmm. Where can we still be able to cut back without kind of messing with the car.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
They delivered the cars with one key fob,
Yeah.
and they were able to keep production things going and basically send an IOU for a second one, which I don't think is a bad idea. So as we talk about the components, we pulled apart a key fob and we said, well, okay, so how many chips are in the key fob? And we didn't break it all down because it still actually is a good key fob.
Right,
maybe we should. Right. But I mean, there's several chips in this.
Yeah.
Right. Just from the surface,
20,
right?
15 to 20, just in that
thing. In this little key fob. So as we went down that rabbit hole, we learned that maybe the manufacturer only needs so many to put in the engine control module and the major pieces, but every supplier, every piece has multiple chips combined to it. And when you start thinking about all the things that need these multiple chips, your backup camera, clearly, obviously, all the automated, driving systems, safety
systems, you name it. Like, God, there's a million, and that's actually like going back to the Acura thing. That's part of the reason, we haven't been, advanced packages. They've kind of like limited that a little bit, right? And I think on what was it, the RDX, they limited that. Is the MDX well, we don't necessarily know yet. 2023. So
yeah, right.
I'm not going to start there, but yeah. So they the advanced packages, some of those packages that have a lot more features, there's a lot more chips. So they've had to say, okay, maybe we just kind of put production toward the cars that we sell more of. In the Acura world, it's like a tech package and A spec. So that's kind of how that worked for us. But yeah.
So each one of these components go into that big equation of how many chips. So hopefully, the latest events and stuff don't constrict us any more than what it already has. Yeah. I think the industry is still saying pretty optimistic. The manufacturers, and again, just talking with them the other day, still expect the end of the year to really ramp up production.
Yep.
But a lot of it's going to have to do with what's going on in the next quarter. I guess you'd say next 2-3 months.
Right. I think these next 2-3 months, as we get into the summertime, it's going to be very telling to see, how, the rest of the year is, because, at this point we are still looking, 2-3 months out in terms of, overall production, what we're getting in. So,
interesting, to correlate back to you getting your vehicle or being able to get a vehicle and see something on the lot, when we feel that when the natural resources that go into making the chip, that constriction could be to 8-10 months, 12 months before we feel the effect in the industry. In other words, those raw materials to time produce a chip that's actually being put in a vehicle is a long road. I don't think people understand. They're not just flying the chip over, plugging it in, and the car is rolling down the road.
Yeah, and that goes, if you are someone who is in the market, and again, we're not trying to sell you a car. I don't want to get into that whole thing, but do consider, now is a good time to say, okay, here's what I need to potentially look at getting. It's going to be very difficult to find stuff on just laying on the lot. You could find a random one here or there, but get yourself on an order, because we can still order stuff. They haven't really limited us there so far with Acura, but who knows with other brands.
That could come. If this gets more complicated than what it is, we could see even a further tightening from our optimism going the other way. So I know there's a lot of places, and you're just kind of touching on that, still saying that, if you don't need a car, don't buy a car. Well, there's a lot of people that still need to get a car or might even still want to. Now might be, you don't make a move sooner than later, because if you're waiting to see if something's going to come down, that outlook is I don't know. Yeah. I just don't know what to say, because you might run into more problems as time goes on.
Yeah.
The one thing, and we'll talk about this in future episodes, but the one thing is I don't foresee it being costing you less in the short term. Correct. It could be years before it even balances back out, I guess.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's what I think everyone, there's that term normalcy that it's been thrown around here, or thrown around with customers, or just as you read things. I don't know what that looks like. There's not that normalcy thing isn't going to be around, at least for the next year or so, maybe longer. But again, there's no time like today to say, hey, I'm ready to get a car, and just kind of, take the plunge in some cases. I think sometimes people overthink that. Some people may be still looking for some kind of a deal, but it is what it is right now. Obviously with supply and demand where we're at, it's, if you want something, just go out and do it.
Yeah, if you can.
Right. If you want to, or if you can. Yeah.
Right.
And you're obviously your trades, not to just touch on that real quick. Your trades are worth more than ever. So
yeah, and that could have some effect as we move down the road. And again, we'll get into that in other episodes. Again, did we answer the question of how many chips are in a car? Well, we definitely learned that it's more than a couple hundred.
That's right.
Right? We know that it's more than a couple hundred. It's probably in the thousands. We don't know how many that is, and I don't think any one person can answer that question. It's probably what we've learned. And all cars are different. Obviously, it is pretty clear, and most people understand that as you move up in equipment and packages and more technology, you get more chips. You know, one thing that was proposed is, well, why don't we just use fewer chips into the car, right, to run more features, kind of like your phone or your computer.
We're gonna talk about that too.
Yeah, and there's there's an interesting piece of that is each one of these components, as if it were to fail or need to be replaced, can be replaced individually. And I think a lot of the industry has gone. They're trying to avoid the 1 or 10 chips that run everything, because when one goes bad, then you lose a lot, not only a lot of features, but it could be detrimental to the operation of the car.
And you kind of see that a little bit now. I think they maybe have gone to the, there's sensors in some cars that they go back, they go wrong, and all of a sudden it makes everything or some things malfunction.
So we're starting to see that now with the newer cars. And I know, the infotainment system, and I'll use an example of that with the new ones that I've recently noticed, and it really didn't occur to me to put it all together until we talked about this, was as you wait for that infotainment system to turn on, because it's a computer, it's got to boot up, right? My radio doesn't work, right?
Right.
Because those are now tied into the same processor, right? So I have to wait for that to come on for my radio to work. So I know that if that goes out, my radio probably goes out. There's very little chance that one's going to work without the other.
Yeah, and I think the main goal, I'm glad we had this discussion, because I think the main goal was to not only educate ourselves. I think that was a big piece of that, because as someone, me being a former teacher and wanting to feel like I want to not educate people, but I want to feel like I'm educated on the topic that people ask me questions about. So A, it was good for that. B, if you listen to this all the way through, hopefully you learn something a little bit, because there's still so many people that come in, they're like, oh yeah, chip shortage, and they kind of put it to the side. I'm like, no, that's kind of a bigger deal than you might think it is.
Yeah, well, and I think they're hearing what they hear out there, and again, from perception of, if I'm listening to the news, there's one chip that needs plugged into these cars, and they're just walking around with, well, here, can you go put that chip in that one, and it's all better.
Yep.
It's way more complicated.
Yeah, way more complicated. And again, we appreciate you listening. Hopefully you listened all the way through. Appreciate everyone, all the comments and stuff. We do have some comments. We're going to talk about that next time, that we appreciate from last time with the Integra. I know we want to talk a little bit about, just follow up on the Integra, what we learned. That's going to be the next episode. Yeah,
well, we're going to dive into that, and we'll touch on some more of these subjects. We actually have a couple other topics that a lot of people ask about, and different things that we'll bring up in future episodes, because we want to know more too. And this is a great medium for us all to learn at the same time. So it's really good. So thanks again for listening, and please, if you know of anybody that actually knows some really good sources or answers to that question, put them in the comments.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean,
that's true. I didn't think
we aren't claiming to have all the answers. We're telling you what we know.
Yeah, there are real experts out there.
Yeah, there are. Right.
They do exist, and they will. Yeah, and people that. They're going to tell us things that we would have no idea, but it's nice to hear from them too. So thank you again. Like and subscribe. If there's anything you guys want to hear about or talk about, let us know.
Thanks again.
Have a good one.